Howdy, folks. Welcome to version 1 of the A Plus practice questions. As you can probably see on the screen, these practice questions is specifically for the 220-1101 exam of CompTIA A Plus. Now, if anyone is wondering if these practice questions would help you with studying for any other version of the A Plus exam, yes, they would. If you're attempting to write an older version, or most likely a newer version of the A Plus exam, yes, these questions will work just fine with regards to preparing you for those exams because at the end of the day, it still measures you on the same skills and it covers the same objectives. In case anyone is wondering if these are the actual questions from the official exam, no, they are not. That's not allowed by the vendor, and pretty much no vendor out there will allow that for that matter. These practice questions of mine do, however, test you on the same things, though. So if you understand the actual topics and the actual concepts themselves, then you're ready to go and write. If you feel like you don't understand the topics or concepts in my questions, please do not attempt the exam. Go study some more first with whatever resources you might have access to. Alrighty, now that we have all that blah blah out of the way, if you folks haven't done it already, please do your homie a favor and like this video. It helps me and the channel out a lot when you do that. And if you'd like to know when I release more practice questions or other training videos for that matter, maybe also consider subscribing. Otherwise you might miss it. Alright, let's start with question 1. User 1 is tasked with having to install additional RAM into a laptop. What type of RAM should be used? Alright, so I've got 4 possible answers here for you guys to go and choose from. The first of which is ECC. So if you don't know what that stands for, that is for error correcting. DDR3, we've got SODIMM, and then we've got VRAM. Alright, so now which one do you guys think this might be? I'll give you guys a couple of seconds. Alright, so starting from the top here, guys, the answer is not ECC. ECC is something we'd normally find on server RAM chips, specifically for servers. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of a blue screen of death, which is also known as a stop error or a memory dump. Very, very inconvenient to have a blue screen of death. And can you imagine ever having something like that on a server? I mean, servers are ideally supposed to be running all the freaking time. So if you, God forbid, happen to experience a blue screen of death on a server of a company, yikes, that cannot end well. So that, my friends, is where ECC comes into play, error correcting. So these blue screens of death normally take place due to something regarding your RAM, and the ECC, in a nutshell, basically prevent that server from experiencing a blue screen of death, stop error, memory dump, whatever you want to go and call that, by correcting the error. So we want to go and do what? We want to install additional RAM into a laptop. So ECC, it's got nothing to do with laptops. That's a function or a feature on server RAM chips. So we can rule out answer A. DDR3, that is more of a desktop kind of RAM. You get DDR, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4. I mean, now more recently you also get DDR5 for desktop PCs and all that. SODIMM, for those of you that's not familiar with it, is laptop memory. So you can already see that that's going to be your answer here. And then we've got VRAM, which is a special kind of virtual memory, or not virtual memory, video memory. It's more specifically used to store video images and things like that. So it's not to do with laptops, not really in this scenario. So if you guys want to go and install RAM into a laptop, the answer is SODIMM. And I've got a nice little picture there for you guys. That is what SODIMM looks like. So in a sense of height, from the little copper plates there at the bottom to the top, in a sense of height, it's more or less the same as a desktop or server RAM chip. But in a sense of width, it's about 2/3 to maybe about 3/4 of the size of a desktop RAM chip. It's not the same width, these chips. So laptop RAM chips, guys, are called SODIMMs. So the next time I or anyone else asks you what type of RAM a laptop takes, it's SODIMM. Or if they ask you what kind of device takes a SODIMM RAM chip, it's a laptop, guys. Alright, let's move on to question 2. You receive a complaint from a user who claims to have no internet or network connectivity. After investigating, you verify there is none at all. There indeed is no internet or network connectivity. The problem is not at the PC, and not the network cable that goes to the patch panel. What can you do or use to locate the user's cable at the patch panel? Now, if you don't know what a patch panel is, I think we should probably start with that, because some folks here that's reading this question might not have a cooking clue what a patch panel is. In large companies, medium to large companies, you'll find there's lots of users, lots of printers and scanners and all kinds of devices. And a lot of these devices have their own network cable. It's normally a LAN cable. It's a form of Ethernet cable. At the end of the day, all these cables, they gather in one location. Various switches, and in the server room, various patch panels. So these patch panels have got lots of little small fly leads. These are small little network cables. It's approximately, I don't know, maybe 1 foot in length to about 1 meter in length. So that's approximately about 3 to 5 feet in length. It's just to connect one part of the network to another part of the network. It's really, really very essentially just to make your life easier when it comes to troubleshooting and connecting one part of the network to another part of the network. It reminds me a lot of the old telephone operators. We would call a telephone operator back in the day. Hello, telephone operator. I would like to speak to this department or that department or this person, that person, this country, that town. And they would yank out your cable and plug it into another hole, and then they would basically connect you. Very much the same, a patch panel. Now, at these patch panels, there is a lot of network cables sometimes. When I say a lot, I mean a lot. This could be hundreds, sometimes even thousands of network cables. So if you have to locate a specific network cable for a specific device, like a computer, it could essentially take forever, and you cannot exactly just go and yank out cables until you see someone is off or someone is on. No. So there needs to be a means for us to locate these cables without, doing too much work. There's a special tool we can use for that. And that's what this question comes down to. So here are the possible answers, guys. We've got a crimper. It's not a crimper. A crimper does get used with network cables. Same kind of cable, ironically. But these crimpers are what we use to go and apply the connector to that network cable. So a crimper is what we use specifically for RJ45 connectors. That's for normal LAN cables. Your Cat5, Cat5e, Cat6, Cat6a, and so on and so forth. And you can also use them for telephone cables. And telephone cables, for those of you that's not familiar, is Cat3, sometimes known as a POTS line, and they use an RJ11 connector. A toner probe? Yes, that actually is the answer. So a toner probe is a device you connect to the one side of the cable. So you would connect this to maybe, let's say, the user's side of the cable, where there is only one cable. You connect to that side, and it basically looks like a magic wand. I'll show you guys a picture in just a moment. It looks like a magic wand. So you're going to go and connect it to the user side of the cable, and when you go to the patch panel and you hover this wand of sorts near the correct cable, it's going to generate a tone. So never mind it being called a toner probe, it's also known as a tone generator because it generates a tone. It makes a beeping sound of some kind. They're not all exactly the same. So you don't actually have to even touch the cables. That's just the interesting part. As soon as you just hover that magic wand near the cable, it generates a tone. Very useful to also locate cables in walls. If you've got hollow walls or hollow floors or in the roof, anything like that, and you don't want to go and make holes in the wall, you can actually locate cables in the wall by using this tone generator. Really, really cool. So we know the answer is B. C is a punch down tool, also used for network cables, but that is to basically get a network cable into these little wall boxes. If you've ever seen a little wall box underneath a desk or near a wall, so basically a network cable will go into that. The wall box gets glued or stuck to that wall. It's got double-sided tape in most cases. And then from there, the user would normally take a small network cable, a short one, that goes to their laptop or the desktop. So to get a network cable into that box in the first place, we use a punch down tool. The fourth answer here is unplug the cables one by one until you find the correct one. Now we know we can't do that. What if you've got a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand cables? If you're going to go and randomly unplug these cables, you could potentially be unplugging other people. You most likely will. And what if you unplug a server or something very important? Yeah, I don't want to be that guy. That's how you get fired, guys. So the answer here is toner probe. I did promise you guys a picture, so there's a picture of a toner probe. You get many, many kinds. You can go to Google right now. Go on a search for tone generator or toner probe. You're going to find there's lots of pictures out there. You can probably go and buy yourself one if you want to. It's not the cheapest thing, but it is a very useful tool to have in your arsenal of tools if you're a technician. All right, folks, let's move on to question 3. A user complains they can never seem to transfer data at more than 100 megabits per second transfer rate. When investigating, you notice that the user is using the wrong cable. What cable is the user using? So you've basically come to the conclusion that the reason they are not able to transmit at more than 100 megabits per second is because it's the wrong cable. So it's the speed of the cable that's most likely the issue here. So I've got 4 kinds of cables here for you guys. So this question is going to test you on how well you know your cables, their speeds, and their maximum distances. More specifically, their speeds in this instance. So the first one we've got there is Cat5. So all 4 of these are Ethernet cable. Ethernet is not specific to a LAN cable, by the way. So all 4 of them are Ethernet. All 4 of them are LAN cables. So visually they might look the same to you, but they are not. I assure you they are not the same, these cables. Cat5 is the oldest one out of the lot. So I suppose it depends on which country, which town you're in. But in my country, the last time I saw companies using Cat5 was up until about 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. And then companies started switching over to Cat5e, and now in my area, pretty much all companies are either using Cat6 or Cat6a. So we don't really have Cat7 or Cat8 yet. They do exist, but you don't really find those. They're not popular yet because they're expensive, and they've got a couple of downsides to them as well. So Cat5, what is the speed to Cat5? Cat5, the speed is 100 megabits per second, so that is most likely what the user is using. Remember, they are complaining they cannot transfer at a speed more than 100 megabits per second. So they're most likely using a Cat5 cable. That is the problem. So that is the one they should not be using, and that is most likely the answer here. The answer is they're using Cat5 because, well, the maximum speed of Cat5 is 100 megabits per second. Now, looking at the other answers here, just for the fun of it, since we already know what the answer is A here, Cat5. Cat5e is exactly 10 times faster, 1000 megabits per second, which is also known as 1 gigabit per second. I've actually got a table here on the right for you guys. There you go. I think this is going to make it a little bit easier for you guys to understand what I'm saying. So looking at the table, you can see Cat5 at the top, 100 megabits per second. Cat5e, exactly 10 times faster at 1000 megabits per second, which is also known as 1 gigabit per second. Cat6, also 1000 megabits per second and 1 gigabit per second. Now you might say, okay, so what exactly is the difference between these two if their speeds are the same? It's the frequency at which they run. You don't need to worry about that right now. The frequency of Cat6 is a little bit higher. And if you go look at them visually, you'll find that Cat5e and Cat6 don't look the same. Cat6 is a little bit thicker. So Cat5 and 5e, visually they look exactly the same. The one is 10 times faster, but visually they look exactly the same. Cat6, however, is slightly thicker. So it's slightly fatter cable, slightly thicker. Cat6a is once again 10 times faster. So that's 10,000 megabits per second or 10 gigabits per second. You can see on the right hand side of my table, all of these cables, the maximum distance is 100 meters. They're going to ask you this in meters in the exam. So if anyone's going to go and sit for the exam, they're going to ask you this in meters. But if you want to know this in feet, that's how many feet it is. It's 328 feet. But they're going to test you this on the metric system. 100 meters is how far the cable can go. So the maximum distance for all of these cables I've listed for you guys is 100 meters. I can guarantee you in real life that is not the case, but the exam does not care about real life. It's not based on your experience in real life. So if you've got experience in real life, throw it out the window. It's based on book knowledge. In real life, I can assure you, you would never get 100 meters out of these LAN cables. You get about maybe 90 meters. Best case scenario, 95 meters. On average, you'll get about 70, 80 meters if we have to put this in the metric system. But yeah, the manual says it's 100, and I can guarantee you that's what the answer in the exam will be. But in real life, it's not going to work. I can tell you now. Right, guys, so the answer is Cat5. Moving on to question 4. Users complain about connectivity issues. After you start investigating, you find the problem to be EMI. So EMI, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is electromagnetic interference. What type of cable would be the best to use for this problem without it costing too much and without sacrificing performance. Remember, that's important here. So you need to read into the details here. It says without costing it too much. So that means there could be more than one answer here. And also without sacrificing performance. Once again, more than one possible answer here. So what is the problem? EMI. So if you don't know what EMI is, it's electromagnetic interference. If you bring a network cable near heavy machinery, near fluorescent lights, or if it's parallel to a power cable for too long of a distance, it's going to have interference. Power cables and these other things I mentioned have small little magnetic fields around them. And believe it or not, that causes interference on a network cable. Now, there's quite a few solutions to that. So first of all, you cannot use your traditional LAN cable because they're going to be, well, they're going to be interfered with. We don't want to use that. So looking at the first answer, coaxial, is that the answer? No. So coaxial is immune to EMI, not completely, but it does have shielding. So coaxial does have copper or steel braiding, and it's got some shielding like tinfoil around it. So it is somewhat immune, but that is old technology. It's outdated. So if you read the last part of that question, it said without sacrificing performance. So coaxial, yes, it's going to help with the EMI, but we are going to be sacrificing performance, so we can rule out A. Looking at answer B, STP. So STP stands for shielded twisted pair. So that's a normal LAN cable. In this case, specifically Cat6 LAN cable. Yeah, so far I think that's going to be our answer because it's shielded. So if you cut that LAN cable open, you're going to find it's got a little bit of a shield around it. I'm going to give you guys a picture of all of these in just a moment. Looking at answer C, UTP. So that's unshielded twisted pair, Cat5E. So that's definitely not going to be the answer because it's just normal LAN cable which is not shielded. I mean, that's the problem to begin with. They are most likely using UTP at this point in time. That's why they're having this issue. So C, I can definitely rule out. Looking at answer D, multi-mode fiber. Now, fiber, for those of you who don't know, is 100% completely immune to EMI. So coaxial cable and shielded twisted pair, they're immune but not completely immune. It's just, they're not as interfered with as much as a normal UTP cable. Fiber, on the other hand, uses glass and light. It doesn't use copper. So it's completely immune to EMI. But it's going to cost us too much. Fiber is an exceptionally expensive cable. So if you read once again the last part of the question, it says, without it costing too much. Fiber, I can tell you now, it's going to cost too much. Coaxial, it's going to be too slow because it also said without sacrificing performance. So A could have been possible if it wasn't for the fact that it said without sacrificing performance. D could have been possible if it wasn't for the fact that it said without costing too much. So that leaves us with B. The answer is B. And there are the cable examples I was talking about, guys. There's a nice little picture for you guys. So the cable there on the left, the little black one, the little copper, that is a coaxial cable. It's got a little copper braiding, this one. You can see it's got a little foil there. So it is somewhat immune. The second cable from the left, that is an STP cable, Cat6 STP. You can see it's got a little foil around it, and it's got a traditional 8 wires inside. It's hidden inside of that little foil. The second cable from the right, that is a normal UTP cable, Cat5E UTP cable, no shielding whatsoever. That's most likely the reason why they've got this issue. And the one way on the right is multi-mode fiber. Now that connector is more for multi-mode fiber, but you actually get many connectors for fiber, guys, but that's more for multi-mode fiber. All right, moving on to question 5. A user complains his phone or tablet can't connect to any Wi-Fi network and is unable to send or receive calls. What is the most likely cause for this? All right, so right off the bat, that can mean a lot of things. So let's have a look at the possible answers here. The first one says disable hotspot. All right, so you need to go and disable a hotspot, or it might be a disabled hotspot. No. So the fact that they can't connect to a Wi-Fi has got nothing to do with disabling hotspot. VPN. So VPN, for those of you that's not familiar, is short for virtual private network. It's one of many ways you can go and remote connect to another location, most likely the office. So if you're working from home or a local coffee shop, anything like that, VPN is a secure remote way for you to go and connect back to, let's say, the office and work in an encrypted connection. It's got nothing to do with Wi-Fi. Battery? No, battery would not cause the Wi-Fi not to work. The last option here is airplane mode, which is the answer in this case. So let me make that green for you guys. For those of you that's not familiar, if you have a tablet or a phone and you put that device in airplane mode, sometimes it's just called plane mode, I think, that basically turns off all wireless connectivity on that device. The screen is on, you can still browse the device and do some things offline, but any form of wireless connectivity is turned off. Whether we're talking Bluetooth here, Wi-Fi, if you want to make your own hotspot, if you want to receive phone calls, make phone calls, any all forms of wireless communication is completely dead on that device. And this is because there's a myth that these signals can interfere with the airplane's instruments and all that, which is why they will normally ask you to turn your phone or your device off on a plane, at the very least in the beginning stage when you're still taking off, and then sometimes when you're landing. Depending on the company you're flying with, they might allow you to have the device on, once you're in the air. But when you're taking off and when you're landing, that's normally a no-go on most airlines. They don't allow you to have that device on because the myth is there that these wireless frequencies could potentially interfere with the plane's instruments. So whether that's confirmed or not, I don't know. We'll have to go and check it out. I think there is some videos online you guys can go check out regarding that. So the answer here, guys, is airplane mode. The user most likely has their device on airplane mode. This is actually very often an accidental thing that people do. I've had many people over the years that says their device doesn't want to work. After investigating, I noticed that the device is on airplane mode. I mean, this happened to my kids the other day. They told me they couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi. After investigating, I noticed their phones were on airplane mode. As soon as you turn airplane mode off, everything will work just fine like normal, guys. Moving on to question 6. Which of the following are fiber cable connectors? So I've got a decently long list for you here, guys, and I made it list long on purpose because I want to try and get you guys familiar with connectors in case you're not already, in case you guys haven't watched all the modules of my video course. So a little trick I can tell you guys regarding fiber cable connectors, and please note this only works in the A+ exam. Do not try this trick in the N+ exam because you will fail that exam if you try this trick there. Any connector that's got 2 letters and only 2 letters in the A+ exam is a fiber cable connector. So if you look at these answers I've got for you guys, there's 6 of them. Which ones have got 2 letters? That will be A, D, and E in this instance. So ST, SC, and LC. So those are abbreviations for the actual names of these connectors. All 3 of those, guys, I can guarantee you, are fiber cable connectors. B, RJ45 is for normal LAN cable connectors. C, RJ11 is for normal POTS lines, telephone lines. And F, B, and C is for coaxial cable connectors, for those of you that don't know. Now, just in case you're curious regarding fiber cable connectors, the 3 that is listed there in green now for you guys, since those are the answers, that is in real life not the only connectors for fiber you get. There's actually many other kinds of fiber cable connectors you get, but those other ones do not have 2-letter abbreviations. They've got actual names and stuff associated to them. But for some weird reason in the A+ exam, these 3 are the only 3 mentioned in the A+ exam. They're the only ones you need to know for the A+ exam. And like I said earlier, this trick only works in the A+ exam. If you go try and write the N+ exam, they're going to ask you about the other fiber cable connectors, not just these 3. They will include these 3, but it won't be limited to these 3. So if you're going to try this stunt with the N+ exam, yeah, you might get some of them correct, but you're not going to get them all correct. So yeah, if you don't remember which ones it is in the exam, ST, SC, LC, just anything with 2 letters, just click that and you'll get the answer right every flipping time, guys. But I do want you guys to obviously know these because the better, the more you know it and the more you understand it, the better for everybody, right? Moving on to question 7. Which of the following cloud computing concepts allows scalable services to be provided to the client? Alright, so here is 4 different kinds of cloud thingamabobs that we get. The first of which is on demand. So on demand is not the answer. That is to give the user or the customer or the client, that's probably going to be you, what they need when they need it. So if I would like to go and acquire something new quickly in the cloud, I don't need to go and deal with other people. I can literally just go and get it. Minimal paperwork, basically none for the most part. I can just go and get it. I just make it. I get what I need right now. So that's what on demand is. On premises, if I want a new server, I'm probably going to have to go and build it, buy it, wait for it to arrive. It takes time. It wastes time. In the cloud, you get what you want when you want it. Wow, I sound like a needy kid. When you have metered, so in the cloud, this is one of my favorite benefits about the cloud, and it's not specific to Microsoft or Amazon or anything like that. You pay only for what you use, which is one of the main reasons why so many companies actually go into the cloud. You only pay for what you use, and it's only a per minute billing system. So if you don't use something, turn it off or delete it, and then, well, you're not going to pay for it. So it costs you a heck of a lot less. The answer in this case is actually going to be C, rapid elasticity. Hoping I didn't butcher that name because I can't say that. I think I said it correctly. So that is the concept of being able to increase your service or the resources to your service when you need it and to decrease it again. I mean, I'm giving you guys the example of a server, but it's actually not limited to servers. This can be anything. So hypothetically, let's say you've got a website that's online. It's being hosted by a cloud provider, like let's say maybe Microsoft. And let's say during the night while you're asleep, the demand for your website goes up insanely. There's a huge spike in traffic. And now your server that's hosting this website can no longer cope with the load. Normally that would have been a problem, but if it's in the cloud, no, it's not. It will automatically increase the resources as needed. If it sees you need more RAM, it'll give it to you. If you need more processing power or more storage, it'll give it to you. And if it sees you don't need it, it can automatically decrease it, because if it decreases it, your cost goes down. So yeah, and you can go and specify caps as well. So if you don't want this to exceed a certain amount of resources or a certain amount in monetary value, you can go and put caps in place. But it has resources. They've got an infinite amount of resources, these cloud providers. And when you need it, it can very quickly scale up the resources you have. If I need 2 more access servers, it can give it to you with the flick of a switch, a click of a button. A couple of seconds later, you've got an access server. I mean, how quickly is that? In real life, this would take hours, days, lots of paperwork. So, yeah. The last one here, guys, which is not the answer, resource pooling means you're sharing resources in the cloud. So these cloud providers like Microsoft and Amazon have got many servers. And when you host something in the cloud on their resources, you are sharing resources. So if I've got a website or a virtual machine or a whatever on their server, I'm putting it on a server and I'm sharing that server with other people out there. I'm not going to know who they are. This cloud provider will never tell you that. If you're concerned about data leakage, don't be. They've got such huge IT budgets. Security is not a problem here. So data will not leak. People cannot influence one another's data. They cannot see one another's data, but you are sharing resources with other people out there. A lot of companies don't even know that. A lot of IT people don't even know that. But if you really are a paranoid fella like my wife is a very paranoid person. You're very concerned about security. If you're willing to throw enough money at it, yeah, you can get your own dedicated server. I mean, there's nothing you can't get if you don't have enough money. If you've got money, to throw at the problem. So money, makes the world go round, I suppose. So in short, guys, the answer here is C. Question 8. You need to verify if data racks have been properly grounded. Which tool should you use? So for those of you not familiar with data racks, the racks are in a server room. If anyone has actually ever been in an actual server room, these giant tower cases, those bays that you slide servers and stuff is into, that is called racks. We measure them in U's, 1U, 2U, 3U's. So the data racks, have they been properly grounded? What tool can you use to test if these things have been grounded? So here are the possible answers. We've got a multimeter. A multimeter, for those of you that's familiar with it, is something that electricians would normally go and use, but we IT people can also go and use them. You can go and use them for a lot of things. You can go and test resistance. You can go and test connectivity, in the form of electricity. You can go and check resistance. I think I did say that. You can go and check volts, amps. You can even check if something is grounded. Whoops, I just gave you guys the answer. So the answer, yes, is multimeter. Cable tester is not the answer. I mean, obviously B, C, and D is not going to be the answer, since I told you the answer is A. Cable tester is something we use normally to go and test network cables. Cat5, Cat5e, Cat6, Cat6a, your normal LAN cables. That's a cable tester. So they're not too expensive. They're actually very cheap. You can buy them at most tech stores and stuff, these little cable testers. A tone generator is something I did mention to you guys earlier in the previous question. I think there it was called a toner probe. Here it's called a tone generator. It's something you connect to the one side of a cable, so you can trace that cable through a wall, through a roof, through the floor. And if there's a lot of cables in one location, you can check which one it is, because if you have the little magic wand near the correct cable, it's going to generate a tone, hence the name. And then what a voltmeter is, well, a voltmeter. It shows you volts. That's all it does. Question 9. A user complains that their PC is making a clicking sound that they have been hearing for more and more and more. They mention it is especially happening when they open a video editing software. What should you do first? Now for this one, I've got a pretty decent list of answers for you guys. Check this out. 6 possible answers. Yep. So, what should you do first if you hear a clicking sound? Now, if it's just a random clicking sound, it can be a lot of things, guys. It could literally be something like a fan, but normally a clicking sound is not something you want to hear in a computer. A clicking sound, let me tell you guys a story, then you're going to know what the answer is. It's normally an indication of a failing hard drive. So I'm not talking about solid state drives, I'm talking about normal mechanical hard drives, the ones that's got moving parts and all that inside of it. So it's normal to hear a hard drive spin up, and it's normal to hear a little bit of clicking now and then. But if you suddenly hear more clicking than usual, way more often, and you start experiencing weird lags, or you can't access the data at times, or you can't access the hard drive at times, that is all signs of a failing hard drive. That's bad. So sometimes when you start hearing clicking, the hard drive might have already failed. Sometimes you get lucky. This actually happens more often than you think, where you start hearing clicking, and as soon as you turn that PC off, the hard drive will never turn back on again. The next time you start a computer, hard drive will not start and the data is lost. So if you hear clicking, it could be a few hours, it could be days, weeks, months. I had hard drives that will last for years after clicking, and they would not fail. But generally, it either has failed immediately, or it's about to fail very shortly. So if you hear clicking, you need to get your ducks in a row and get that stuff backed up immediately. There's nothing you can do about it. So looking at the answers in front of us, I think you know what the answer is. It says replace the fans. No. Replace the CPU. The CPU is not going to make any sound whatsoever. Replace the hard drive. Yes, eventually. So that is part of the answer, but that's not the answer. The question says at the back of the question says, what should you do first? First. What do we do first? So replacing the hard drive, yes, that is something we're going to do, but it's not what we're going to do first. D says back up everything. Yes, that's the answer. The very first thing you want to do when you start hearing clicking is you back up. Or you tell that client to go and back the heck up, because they're about to lose everything on that hard drive. The next time they turn that PC off, the hard drive is probably not going to turn back on again. So you back up everything immediately. And once you back everything up, then you go and replace the hard drive. So it's first D and then followed by C. E says replace the graphics card. It's got nothing to do with graphics. And F says do a system restore. No, clicking sound is not going to be solved by a system restore, guys. Right, so there you have it. Back up everything. Question 10. A user has signed up for a web-based application that they pay a monthly fee for. Which of the following solutions has the user just purchased? Alright, so this is an application. It's running in a cloud. It's installed in a cloud. Everything is happening somewhere else. So we know it's cloud. The question is, what kind of cloud are we dealing with? So if you look at the first one here, out of the 4 answers, we've got IaaS. The I stands for infrastructure. So that's infrastructure as a service. B is software as a service. C is platform as a service, and D is desktop as a service. So it's basically just the front letter that keeps changing here. So looking at the very first one, infrastructure as a service, what classifies as infrastructure? So if you look at your normal laptop, desktop, or server on premises, if you have something on it like a virtual machine that's running on that laptop, that desktop, that server, that is infrastructure. But it's just infrastructure because it's running on your property. It's using your RAM, it's using your CPU, it's occupying space on your storage. Now, if you go and take that virtual machine, it's not limited to virtual machines, I'm just using this as an example, guys. If you take that virtual machine and you upload it to the cloud, to something like Microsoft's Azure platform, just as an example, or you create it from scratch in the cloud, that would now be an example of infrastructure as a service. It's still infrastructure, but now since it's not using your resources, it's now using someone else's resources, and they're rendering that machine back to you as a service of sorts for a monthly fee. It's infrastructure as a service. It's a whole flippin' virtual machine, and you can do anything pretty much on that machine. So as soon as you connect to that virtual machine from there, no restrictions. You can do pretty much just about anything. So looking at the question, it says web-based application. No, the answer is not A. Software as a service is when software is installed somewhere else, running somewhere else, in a cloud provider like Microsoft or whoever, and it just displays to the user onto their screen via the internet, via something like a browser, for example. And that actually is the answer here, guys. Software as a service, I mean, Office 365 is a very good example of that. Depending on a subscription you've got, you will have access to things like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Microsoft Teams. You can access these via a web browser without necessarily having them installed on your computer. That would be an example of software as a service. Now, as for the other answers here, it's not C or D, but in case anyone is curious what they are, P, being platform as a service, would probably be something like having Active Directory in the cloud, Azure Active Directory, or having a SQL database in the cloud. So it is something that you would normally have to do a lot of work for on premises, but if you move it to the cloud, it becomes minimal. If you look at something like Active Directory, for those of you familiar with that, if you want to get yourself an Active Directory on premises, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it's a lot of work. You have to go and build yourself a virtual server or a physical server. That's a lot of work. You have to go and install the server operating system. You have to go and add a role, the ADDS role, Active Directory Domain Services, promote the domain controller, create a domain, and. So not difficult, it's not rocket science, but it's going to take you quite some time. If you go on to the Azure platform, just as an example, sounds like I'm promoting it, but I'm not. If you go on there, you can pretty much just jump in, create user accounts and groups and all that, and there you go. So it's minimal versus what it could have been. That is platform as a service. The last one, desktop as a service, is very similar to infrastructure as a service. Some might actually think it is the same thing. It's essentially just virtual machines. It's more specific to virtual machines. Infrastructure service is virtual machines, but it's not limited to virtual machines. I mean, it could even be a virtual network for all we know. Desktop as a service, however, is limited to virtual machines. It's essentially a virtual remote desktop running somewhere else. It's more a remote desktop than a virtual computer. And your users can connect to this remote desktop, and this remote desktop is running in the cloud. It's not running on your service, it's running in the cloud. They can go and use it as if it's a virtual machine, and there you go. Anyway, so in short, the answer is software as a service, guys, when it comes to a web-based application running somewhere else, being offered as a monthly fee. Moving to question 11. One of your technicians would like to block people from remotely logging into a server. Which port should your technician block? Looking at the port numbers we've got available here, guys, we've got port 80. Port 80 is for HTTPS, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That's normal web browsing in clear text. Port 21 is FTP, File Transfer Protocol. So that's to transfer files and stuff between servers and stuff in the background. Not really what we're looking for. Port 23 is Telnet. That's to remotely connect to something. You can telnet into a router or telnet into a switch. It's going to ask you username and a password, and you can go and do some configuration on it. It's not necessarily in a GUI interface. It's normally more in a command line interface. We would use things like PuTTY and whatever to go and do that. But I think that's probably going to be the answer here. The fact that they said you need to block people from remotely logging into a server. Telnet does count as remotely logging in, so that's probably going to be your answer here. C. D is 443, which is HTTPS. So A was HTTP, and D is HTTPS. The S stands for secure. So it's Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. It's also web browsing, except this bad boy is encrypted web browsing. So in conclusion, guys, the answer here, I think we all know, is port 23 that needs to be blocked. Moving on to question 12. User 1 complains they can't connect to another user on the network. What command can user 1 run in command prompt to test connectivity to another host? Now, we used to say test connectivity to another computer, but these days, yeah, we know people don't necessarily use computers. This can be a tablet, a phone, a printer, a scanner. It can be anything that you can connect to a network. You can go and test connectivity to. So what command do we use for that? So looking at the available answers, the answer here, guys, is ping, but we'll get to the other ones as well. So ping, if you go type that into command prompt, followed by a space, and then the remote destination's IP address or its name, it's going to send 4 packets of data, exceptionally small packets of data, to the remote device or host. And if that device is configured correctly, and if it's on a host and it receives it, it will resend all 4 of those packets back. And that'll indicate that there's connectivity. If you don't get all 4 of them back, you only get, let's say, 3 back. That means the configurations is correct, but there's something wrong on the network. This could be maybe some sort of interference in the cable, possibly EMI, which is something we spoke of earlier. Could be something like that. If you get no packets back and it just says no reply, that can mean a lot of things. I mean, the cable could be unplugged, could be damaged, could be the IP configuration is incorrect, could be a firewall. But from that point forward, you would start investigating. Looking at B, which is not the answer, tracer is to trace something, trace a device, trace a website, trace something like that. It's not trace someone where they are per se. It's usually more used for troubleshooting purposes. So if I want to go and see where a problem is, so if my internet keeps going on and off, and I'm not sure if the problem is in-house, if it's with my ISP, or if it's something beyond my ISP, I can go and say tracert space and then trace, for example, Google, and it will show you to a maximum of 30 hops. Every hop is supposedly a router, but the first 1 or 2 might be your in-house firewall or something. And if you see it drops at hop 3 or hop 4 or so, then you know it's beyond your network. Hop 1 would be your network, your router, or it might be your firewall, and hop 2 will be your router. Hop 2 will be your ISP if it's a small company. If it's a big company, hop 2 might still be inside your company. That might only be your router then. Hop 3 will be beyond your ISP in most cases. Might be ISP, it might be beyond the ISP, depends on how big your company is and how many assets they've got. But if it drops beyond hop 3, hop 4, hop 5, hop 6, then you know, aha, that's where the problem is. It's not the ISP, it's not me, it's beyond that, and then it's, well, technically out of your hands. Looking at answer C, ipconfig is just to show you basic overview of that specific device's network configuration. It'll show you the IP address, the subnet mask. That's pretty much it. It doesn't show you much other than that. ipconfig/renew, which is answer D. You'll find there's a lot of commands that starts with ipconfig, and then it will have a / and then something. ipconfig/renew is to request a dynamic IP address, a new one. So if you have a device that's configured on dynamic IP address, which is the default, and it currently has no IP address, which would be considered as a PIPA, that is a command you can go and run to ask for a new IP address. It's the same as turning a PC on. It's the same as connecting a LAN cable or connecting to the Wi-Fi. That machine's going to ask for an IP address, and as soon as it gets one, it'll be able to access resources on the network. So getting back to the answer, guys, the answer was A. It is ping. Ping is used to go and test connectivity to remote hosts. Question 13. Which one of the following is an example of an APIPA IP address? Before I get into the possible answers, guys, IP addresses is something you guys need to be very familiar with when you write the A+ exam, and even more so when you write the Network Plus exams. So you need to know what an IP address is. You need to know what a public and a private IP address is. You need to know what a static and a dynamic IP address is. You need to know what a class A, B, and C IP address is, especially class C. You need to basically just be able to identify them for the most part. In N+, you need to do more than just identifying them. You need to know what an APIPA IP is, of course, which is this question, and then you need to know what a loopback IP is. I might have forgotten 1 or 2, but that's the gist of it. Alright, so here are the 4 possible answers we've got for today. The first one there is a private IP address. It's a class C private IP address. And if you look at the second one, that is a loopback IP address. That's to test your own TCP IP stack and to test your own network card if it's working. Answer C, any weird IPs you don't recognize is normally a public IP address. So by the looks of it, answer C looks like a public IP address to me. And answer D is most certainly the answer, which is an APIPA IP address. APIPA IP addresses always start with 169.254. The last 2 octets does not matter, but the fact that it starts with 169.254 is an APIPA IP address. So if I ask you which one of the following is NAPIPA, just look for one that says 169.254. Or if I give you an IP that starts with 169.254 and I ask you, this is an example of what? Look for the answer APIPA. It will always be APIPA. It's not actually an IP, even though we call it that. It's a placeholder of sorts. It is when a device is unable to get an IP address. Why? We don't know. This could be for any reason. It could be that the hotspot's off, it's disconnected from the Wi-Fi, network cable is unplugged, whatever. It can be a firewall's blocking the device. The point is, the device is on dynamic, it's unable to get an IP, and when it's unable to get one, you will see 169 or 254. So you're going to find that this machine that's got that IP will most likely complain that it's unable to connect to the network. It's going to have all kinds of connectivity issues. All right, so just to summarize, I've got a bit of a little list here on the right hand side. You can see I highlighted all in pink for you guys. So A, private IP address, but it's also a class C IP address. B is a loopback IP. C is an example of a public IP. And D is an example of an APIPA IP. Moving on to question 14. User 1 is building a computer for a client. What can user 1 do or use to prevent ESD? What is ESD, guys? ESD is short for electrostatic discharge. It basically refers to the fact that the human body's got enough static electricity in it to blow circuitry. So if you go ahead and just touch a motherboard, touch a RAM chip or a graphics card, chances are you might actually end up blowing it. Even though it's not plugged in, you can blow it because the human body has got enough static electricity to do that. I know, it's pretty amazing. It's cool and at the same time quite scary, quite frankly. So what can we do to prevent that? We're not talking about what we do in real life. In real life, all we do is we just open the computer's case and then we touch the inside of the frame, and that actually allows you to discharge into the frame. That's what we do in real life. But the exam doesn't care about real life, remember? The exam cares about what the manual says we should do. And the manual says thou needs to use an anti-static wrist strap or a rubber mat or both. So the answer in the exam will either be an anti-static wrist strap or it'll be rubber mat, but they will not give you both since they're both equally correct. So if you don't know what that looks like, guys, there's a picture for you guys on the right. You can strap that sucker onto your arm, onto your ankle, and you clip it onto the frame of the case, and that's going to essentially allow you to, well, discharge into the frame safely. It's the same as touching the safe with your hands before you touch the motherboard. Now, obviously, we're not going to go and wash our hands first. I mean, that's got nothing to do with the price of eggs here. STP, that is shielded twisted pair. That's a shielded cable, network cable. It's got nothing to do with electrostatic discharge. And turning the computer off is not going to solve this problem. And you could unplug the computer, turn it off, and if you touch that motherboard, it's still going to blow because the static electricity. So you want to discharge before you touch the motherboard. Moving on to question 15. User 1 complains they don't have internet access and that it was working fine the day before. User 1 runs the ipconfig command. Remember previously we had that as an answer in one of our questions. ipconfig shows you basic networking configuration about that machine. So user 1 runs the ipconfig command in CMD and sees the results shown in the image below. What command should user 1 run first after seeing the results shown below? Alright, so guys, here's a bit of a picture for you guys. It's a bit small, but there is nonetheless. So after running ipconfig, that is what the user sees. Now looking at that, you're going to see there's in the exam, there's going to be a couple of exhibits they're going to give you. Sometimes they'll give you an exhibit, sometimes they will not. And you need to look at the exhibit before you answer, because if you don't, the answer could actually be anything. All of them could be right, all of them could be wrong. You need to look at the exhibit before you answer these kinds of questions in the exam. Alright, so the user says they can access the internet, was working just fine the day before. You run ipconfig, this is what you see in the picture. Now here's the possible answers we've got. What command should user 1 run first? Alright, so we've got ping. Ping is just to test connectivity. Testing connectivity is not going to solve my problem, is it? B is ipconfig. You can see there's 3 of them that starts with ipconfig, but it says /release. Release is to release your current dynamic IP address. Now that's assuming you've got one, of course. C is to renew. We know what that is because of what we said in one of the previous questions. That's to ask for a new dynamic IP address in the event of you not having one. And then D is ipconfig flush DNS. That's to erase your DNS cache, the temporary memory of what sites you've recently visited and whatnot. So D is definitely not the answer. It's going to be between B and C here. Now, normally, if you leave a PC on for too long, let's say during the night, that IP address, in case you don't know, expires. A dynamic IP address expires. It could take days, it could just take hours, but for the average company, it expires in about approximately 24 hours. Now, when an IP address expires, you normally still have that IP. It's simply expired, and when you try and use it to access websites or anything like that, it's not going to work. You have to renew the IP, and that's normally done by turning the PC off and on again. It's going to release it. It's going to ask for a new one as soon as it turns back on again. Or you plug the network cable out, plug it back in, disconnect from the Wi-Fi or reconnect to the Wi-Fi, or you can go and manually do it in command prompt. So in command prompt, you would first type ipconfig/release to release the old IP. That's the same as turning the PC off. Then this will be followed by ipconfig/renew to ask for a new one, which is the same as turning a PC on. So the order was normally to release first, then renew. Release is to release the old IP, renew is to ask for a new one. Now looking at the picture, what's the IP address there, boys and girls? 169.254.something.something. What is 169? Remember from the previous questions? That's a pipa. A pipa means you don't have an IP address. That's why they can't access the internet, because they don't have an IP. So if you look at between B and C, which one would we normally run first? Normally, yes, it would be release. But release is to release an IP if you've got one. Do we have one? No, we do not. So we're going to skip release in this instance, and we're going to skip ahead straight to renew. The answer here is to renew, to ask for an IP address, boys and girls. Be very careful for these types of questions in the exam. You will get these types of questions in the exam, and it's all about how much you pay attention. I wouldn't say they're trick questions. It's just to check if you actually understand the concept. And if you understand the concept, like you guys probably do now, they can throw this question at you any way they want, and you will get it right every time. So I hope this is helping you guys out a bit. Remember to give the video a like if you guys haven't done it already, because I am putting in a flippin' lot of effort to get you guys to pass this exam. So the least you can do is give this video a like. Right, moving on to question 16. A technician installs Cat5e cable in a roof, which is 150 meters long, or if you want to put it in feet, it is 492 feet long. The technician complains that the cable appears to be dead even after replacing it. So they've put it in, it was that length, it didn't work, they replaced it, it's still dead. I mean, the second cable, what's the chance of the second cable also being dead? What is the maximum distance a Cat5 Ethernet cable can go without being repeated? So repeated means you can go and put it into a switch. If it's a certain distance, you put it into a switch, and then from there you put in another cable, so that's going to repeat it. Or you can put it into an actual repeater, which is not something we actually do in real life. What is the maximum distance that Cat5 can go? If you guys remember from the previous questions in this video, please don't go and skim to the previous question to go and cheat, because you're only cheating yourself here. Remember, this is not a test per se. But if you're going to go and peek at the answer the whole time, then you're not going to remember your answers. The whole idea is you guys need to try and remember these answers, because you need to write this exam and pass this flipping exam. What was the maximum distance a LAN cable can go, guys? 100 meters, or 328 feet if you want to count it in feet. And you would remember I was moaning and groaning that that's what the manual says, but in real life it's not actually that distance. So the answer is 100 meters. Question 17. Which of the following ports is used for secure web browsing? Now, I kind of actually sort of gave you guys the answer to this one earlier, so it's all about how much attention you were paying, I suppose. So, quite a few answers that I've got for you guys here, and if you were paying attention earlier, you would know what the answer is now. So, A, port 22, that is for SSH, so that's to remotely connect to something like a switch and a router or what, but it's encrypted. Port 23 at answer B, that is Telnet. So it's essentially the same thing as SSH, except that's in clear text. So that's the older, unsecure version, I suppose. C is 25, that is SMTP. So that is when you want to go and send the email, at least the old school way of doing things. D is port 80, HTTPS, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is normal web browsing in clear text, the unsecure version. 110 at answer E, that is POP3, that is to receive email, or at least the old school way. And answer F is 443, which is HTTPS. The S stands for secure, like I said earlier in this video. And that means it's encrypted. It's secure. And that brings us to answer here, which is F443. That is secure web browsing, guys. Question 18. Which of the following wireless standards is only capable of 5 gigahertz frequency? Alright, so I've got 4 standards here for you guys. Yes, there are other ones out there. So if we talk about wireless standards, the ones that's missing from this list is 802.11ac and 802.11ax. Those are ones you need to know for the Networking Plus exam. You definitely need to know that. AX is so flippin' new. It actually came out during the pandemic. It came out in 2021, mind you. So if you go watch my N Plus videos, you would know that. But for the A Plus exam, you only need to know these 4. So starting at the top with 802.11a, that one is only able to run at 5 gigahertz. Looking at 802.11b, that one is only able to run at 2.4 gigahertz. 802.11g is only able to run at 2.4 gigahertz as well. 802.11n is able to run at both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. The question said what? Which of the following wireless standards is only capable of running at 5? That would be the first one, guys, A. So I'm going to highlight this for you guys in green. I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to put here on the side what frequencies they were running at. So the ones that's the most common that we use in our everyday life is probably G. That's for your normal office hotspot, home hotspot, Wi-Fi. You know, most of these devices broadcast at G, which is 2.4 gigahertz. B is more for things like Bluetooth. Bluetooth also runs at 2.4 gigahertz, in case you guys didn't know. A is basically the second thing that your average hotspot or router would broadcast on these days. So if you have a lot of interference, because pretty much most things in life run at 2.4 gigahertz, so that's, as you can imagine, brings about a lot of interference. So if you've got something else running at 2.4 gigahertz in your house or your office, which is causing interference, you can go and switch that router or access points to 5 gigahertz, which is the A frequency. N, the last one there at the bottom, that is long range line of sight communication. So that's when your company or your client's company would have a dish up on the roof and it would have another one someplace far on a mountain or a tall building facing towards one another. Long range, high speed communication. Is that what that's the one we use it for? Question 19. Your technician is concerned that the Wi-Fi network is being utilized by unauthorized users. So in other words, there's people on the Wi-Fi network that does not need to be on network. You know, it's a little bunch of people that's up to shenanigans. Which of the following would minimize unauthorized use? All right, so here's the possible answers we've got to choose from. Changing the SSID, that is just the name of the network. It's not going to stop people from connecting to it. So if they, for example, have the password or whatever, changing the name of the Wi-Fi network is not going to do any difference, guys. B says using a MAC filter. So far, I think that's going to be the answer. All tablets, phones, laptops, and whatever have a MAC address. You can think of this as your ID or your social security number. It's unique to every device. And on this router or access point, you can go put a filter. All the devices that's allowed to connect to it, you insert their MAC addresses in the whitelist, basically. And anything else that connects, even if they've got the right password, will not be able to connect. Or you can just go and, well, do it the other way around. But it's easy just to go and insert the MAC addresses of devices that's allowed. Everything else will be blocked. Very, very effective. And so far, that's my answer. C is changing the IP address. Changing the IP address is not going to do you any good, guys. At the end of the day, they can just go and scan for it again and they'll find it. And if it's a Wi-Fi network, you don't even need to scan for the IP. You just scan for wireless networks and voila, there you go. Changing the IP would make absolutely zero difference to this. Zero. Changing the password. So that is the second best answer here. I wouldn't say that's a bad answer, but it's not a good answer. So if they, depending on how they gain access in the first place, changing the password may solve the problem. It might not. If they cracked the password, they can just crack it again. If they got it from an employee or someone that was leaking it, they can just get it again and once again. But a MAC filter is not something you can get past. That is very, very effective. I wouldn't say it is unhackable. Anything can be bypassed. A hacker, you can go and use a a MAC spoofing concept. If you really want, you can go and spoof MAC addresses. So it is possible to bypass it, but it's a heck of a lot harder to go and do it. Question 20. Which of the following services provides a device with an IP address? All right, so here are the services we've got to our disposal. We've got DNS at the top, so that's domain name server or service, depending on how you want to look at it. That is to convert IPs to names and names to IPs. I mean, it's not the only thing it does, but in a nutshell, that's what it does. So if you go to a website and you type in www.facebook.com or youtube.com, your computer doesn't actually know what that is or where that is. So your machine's going to ask the DNS, hey buddy, my user just typed in facebook.com or youtube.com. I don't know what that is or where that is. Can you help me out? And that's basically where the DNS is going to come in a nutshell. A web server, that's a server that basically hosts websites for the most part. So this could be on premises, can be in the cloud. It hosts your websites, and that's effectively what's going to allow people to see a website online. It's got nothing to do with this question at hand. Active Directory, that is a role you install on a server, the ADDS role. It allows you or whoever the administrator is to create user accounts and groups and group policies and organizational units and that kinds of stuff. That is where the accounts and the groups resides for people in a company that wants to log on. So if you go to the average company and people want to log on to the average machine, they normally type in their username and their password. Where do you think that authenticates to? It authenticates to the central server, which is the Active Directory. So the answer is also not C. It's not A, it's not B, it's not C. It leaves us with D. That's the answer, and I can confirm it. DHCP is also a role you install on a server, or at least it can be. And the purpose of that is to dish out IP addresses to any device that connects to your network. DHCP is normally built into most routers. It's normally turned on in most routers. So if you're in a home environment or a small office environment, the DHCP is most likely turned on a router, and the router is probably the device that's dishing out IPs so your devices can connect to the internet. But if you're in a medium to a large size company, DHCP is normally turned off on the router by the IT technicians, and they would normally go and add the DHCP role onto a server because that way they've got a lot more control. Some of you guys would have learned if you were watching my videos. Question 21. Which of the following network cables can be used and installed to avoid a fire code violation? This is something you guys are going to see probably multiple times in the exam. I've seen they love asking about fire code violations and stuff. Which cables are fire resistant? Which ones don't give off poisonous gas? Which ones does not allow or does not get you into a fire code violation? It's always the same answer, and the answer is plenum, guys. A plenum cable is a cable that is fire resistant. It does not give off poisonous toxic gases because we tend to put these cables in the walls or in the roof or so. So in the event of it possibly catching fire, no poisonous gases. I think that honestly in real life that's probably going to be the least of your concern. There's going to be so much flip and smoke. But nonetheless, it does not give off poisonous gas or anything like that. The answer is plenum. Coaxial, no. If you burn that sucker, it's going to give off gases, and that's old cable. Fiber is made out of glass for the most part, but it's not the one that's going to help you with fire code violations. Shielded, no. It could be. I mean, believe it or not, some shielded cables are made of plenum, and UTP cable as well, but they're specifically looking for the word plenum here. So whenever someone says fire code violation, fire resistant, or anti-toxic gases, look for the word plenum. That's the one you're going to look for, guys. Right, guys, and before we move on to question 22, just want to quickly remind you guys in case you forgot, or for those of you who don't know, I do have a Discord server as well. So if you look in the video description down below, it's literally going to be at the very, very bottom of the video description. There is my Discord server link for those of you that have Discord and that know what Discord is. So it's called Free IT Training. It's an IT community of IT people, which includes myself. You'll find people in that server that's quite clued up on A+ and quite a lot of other courses. And people that's studying A+ and other courses like yourself. So if you've got any questions about this course or any other course, or you want to help other people, feel free to join the server, ask your questions there. There's lots of free study resources on those servers as well. And yeah, we're just there to help one another. So if you want to help someone else that's got a question, by all means, help them out. If you want to ask a question, by all means, ask your question there. As for other practice questions for A plus, so the one that you guys are watching right now is for the 1101 exam. So that's quarter one exam basically. Yes, there will be a video for the 1102 exam as well. I'm also going to try and make it quite a lot of questions for you guys. And then we'll see how things go. Depending on how popular the videos is, I might make more, I might not. I will, however, put a couple of ones on my Patreon as well, so feel free to check out my Patreon. I'm going to be uploading a bunch of practice questions on my Patreon as well, for those of you that's interested. But depending on how well it does on YouTube or not, I will decide whether I'll put more on YouTube or not. But there will be some on my Patreon as well if you guys want to check it out. You can find the Patreon link in the video description down below as well. Right, let us move on to question 22. Which of the following devices broadcasts out of all its ports? There's a certain way we phrase this. We say this device is a very dumb device. That's actually how we phrase it. It's a very dumb device. Which device am I referring to, guys? The answer is a hub. It's a device which is for the most part extinct. Not completely, but nobody uses it. A hub at first glance looks like a switch, if you've ever seen a switch. So it allows you to plug in various network cables into it, so you can go and connect your various laptops, desktops, and servers and stuff to one another. The problem with that is, if one device sends something to another device on a network, if my laptop sends something to your laptop on a network and we plugged into the same hub, the hub will send that information out of all its ports. So it's kind of like me speaking to you and telling you a secret, but you yelling it out to everybody. Everybody's going to know what the secret is. There's no confidentiality at all. A hub is a very dumb device, but it is a very old device. It's very old technology. It's legacy. Nobody uses it, but yet it's for some reason still in the A plus courses. It's still in the A plus exams, and nobody uses it in real life. So I don't know why it's still in the exam. I feel I just put it there to mess with us, but hey, that's what it is. A switch visually looks very much the same as a hub, except a switch sends the information to the device who it was intended for. So if my device sends something to your device on a network, it would go only to your device. A router or a router, depending on which country you're from, you'll probably pronounce that differently. It's to route your information over the internet, like the name suggests. It is your gateway in most cases to the internet. So that's the last device you've got to go through, sometimes the very first and only device you've got to go through to get to the outside world, to get to the internet. An access point, the last one there, which is also known as an AP for short, we very often refer to it just as an AP. It's just a device on the wall or the roof or the ceiling. It's normally on the roof. It allows you and other people to connect to it wirelessly, and from there you can go and connect to your router. So if your router is very far away, because most routers do allow you to connect to them wirelessly, but if it's very far away and the signal is very weak, you can extend that reach with an access point. So somewhere along the line, it's going to be a network cable going through the roof or the walls. It's going to plug into the access point, and it's just going to go and rebroadcast that network a little bit further. The distance is just going to go further and further and further. That's all it is. So the answer here, guys, hub. There's a very good chance you are going to get questions about this in the exam. Not necessarily phrased like my question, remember mine is custom made, but it will come down to the same concept. If they ask you anything about any device that broadcasts out of all of its ports, it's a hub. Or they say a hub does what? It broadcasts out of all of its ports. Moving on to question 23. Which of the following devices is usually a PC's default gateway? Alright, so here we've got a couple of answers for you guys again. You can see it's very much the same answers, except this time the answer is not going to necessarily be A, which was hub in a previous question. So, default gateway, what is that? That is the first device in most cases that your device has to hit to get to the outside world. To get outside your building, to go onto, for example, the internet, or to be able to access other networks. So it's usually the first device, but not always. If you go look at a medium to a large size company, the default gateway is not necessarily the first device you've got to hit. But yeah, it's usually. So what is the first device you've got to hit in an average home environment or a small environment? That would be your router. It's the first device and the only device you've got to hit. So the answer here is obviously going to be router, guys. So the first device, or quite frankly the only device you're going to hit in a small office environment or a home environment to get to the outside world, is the router. It's going to allow you to get to the outside world. If you look at a medium to large size company, yes, there is a router, but it's not the first device you're going to hit to get to the outside world. In a medium to large size company, it's normally going to be something like a firewall, but we don't see a firewall here. I don't think they're going to go and ask you guys anything technical like that. The A plus scores wouldn't ask you anything like that. I don't think even N plus would do that. I'm just mentioning this, just for fun's sake, so that you know, in real life, it might actually not be a router. In real life, the first device you have to hit in a medium to large size company is normally something like a firewall. So you're going to go to the firewall first, and then from there, it's going to go to the router, the traffic. So on your laptop, desktop, server, or whatever you're using, if it asks for the default gateway IP, that would not be the IP of the router. It would actually, in fact, be the IP of the firewall that you're going to be putting in. If it's a small office environment or your home environment, it's normally going to be the IP of your router, which in most cases will be 1.1 or 0.1 at the end. All right, moving on. Moving on to question 24. Which of the following devices can use VLANs to secure networks? VLANs, for those of you that's not familiar with it, stands for virtual LANs. VLAN, virtual LAN, same thing. It's very much the same as a normal local area network, except this is a virtual area network. It allows you to create multiple virtual networks in your network without having to go and put down extra network cables, extra switches, extra this, extra that. Then imagine you've got a medium to large size company and suddenly there's a need to have extra networks in that company. Do you really want to go through the painstaking process of putting extra cables in the walls for the exact same locations and all that? No, it's going to cost a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's just crazy. So why not use the existing infrastructure and make virtual networks within your one physical network? How does one do that? Where does one do that? You do that on a switch, guys. But it's normally done on a managed switch. So you get different kinds of switches. You get unmanaged, you get managed. Unmanaged is, well, cheap versions. And they normally only have one VLAN, which means everything on that switch is on the same network. So as soon as you plug yourself into that switch, that cheap switch, and I'm assuming your IP address is configured correctly and your cable's working, you would essentially be on the same network. That's it. End of story. But on a managed switch, just because you and another device is plugged into the same switch does not mean you're on the same network. You could be on two different virtual networks. Port 1 all the way through to port 4 could be VLAN 1, virtual network 1. And then port 5 all the way through to port 8 could be VLAN 2. So maybe I'm plugged into port 8 and you're plugged into port 1. So we are essentially on two different VLANs. Physically, we're on the same network. We're plugged into the same network. But digitally speaking, we are on two different networks. That's a VLAN. And this is achieved with a switch, more specifically a managed switch. And you do that by logging into the switch. You get many brands, many models. The places where I've done it most often is on HP switches, Cisco switches, and the Huawei switches. So that's where you normally do that. It's not a hub. It's not a router. It's not an access point. Question 25. Which of the following cloud models allows a company to keep some data on premises and in the cloud at the same time? Community? No. That does not exist, first of all, so that you can just completely ignore A. That doesn't even exist. B, C, and D, I can confirm. Those are cloud models that do exist. They do, in fact, exist. If you look at a private cloud, so these are the three main kinds of cloud you get. You get private, public, and hybrid cloud. And within each of these, you get subcategories. And within those subcategories, you get sub-subcategories. And would you believe me if I told you get sub-sub-sub-subcategories? Yep, you do. So private cloud is, I don't know why to even call it private cloud because it's pretty much what you have already. So that's when you've got data centers on premises and you for the most part have control and you for the most part buy all the material and everything, so it's not really cloud in that sense. Some companies can afford to have their own data centers on premises, so they would have a company nearby or some place where they rent some space in the data center. So it's cloud, but it's not cloud. The benefit is you've got a lot of control. A drawback is it's insanely expensive because you're pretty much still paying for everything. So it's still on premises is what we say. Public cloud is what most of us use. That's when everything is 100% online. That's public cloud. Hybrid cloud is when you've got stuff online on someone else's property and at the same time you still have some stuff on premises and you are synchronizing this most likely with what you have online. An example of this would be something like SharePoint, Active Directory. I think Active Directory is probably a very good example. So you still have your traditional Active Directory on premises. At the same time, you or your client's company have now acquired an Azure Active Directory in the cloud, and you most likely have synchronized these two bad boys of one another. That is the answer, and that is hybrid. So if you look at the question, you look at the possible answers, the answer here, folks, is hybrid. D. Question 26. Which of the following connector types is used to terminate old telephone cabling? All right, so we've got a bunch of connectors for you guys there. I think let's start at the tip I gave you guys earlier, way earlier in this video with regards to fiber connectors. I told you guys if you look at specifically A+ exams, specifically at fiber cable connectors, what can we use to identify them? It'll always be the two-letter ones. So D being ST, that stands for straight tip by the way, is a fiber cable connector. RJ11 is the one and only phone cable connector, which is the answer here. RJ45 is the main connector for LAN cables. Doesn't matter if you're using Cat5, 5E, Cat6, Cat6A, different speeds, but they all use the same connector, which is an RJ45. RG59 is one of many coaxial cable connectors. It's not the only one, guys. You get different kinds, just like with fiber cables. So RG is one of the more popular ones, but that is essentially a coaxial cable connector. Question 27. User 1 wants to install a graphics card in their PC to do some gaming. And obviously, that's one of the main reasons why we've got graphics cards. User 1 wants to verify that a graphics card is indeed compatible with their PC. So to want to do it and to be able to do it is two different things. Which of the following connector types would user 1 most likely use? So what I mean by that is what connector on the board, the motherboard, would user 1 use to go and plug the graphics card into? So if you have a graphics card, where we are right now at this point in time, you would most likely use a PCIe. That's a PCI Express slot. You'll find the speed is times 16. It's got like an X16. So if you run a Google search for motherboards and you look at the different slots and stuff, guys, one of the slots, there's normally only one of this on most motherboards unless you've got a lot of money. Some gaming motherboards will have 2 or 3 or even 4 of these slots, but generally you'll have only one. It's one of the top slots between your PCI slots. It's a times 16 one. It stands for Express. Up until 2009, this answer could have possibly been D, AGP. AGP is also a graphics card slot, but it was only times 8, and those are extinct. They don't make them anymore. I think they discontinued those motherboards in 2009. So if you still have a motherboard that accepts AGP, it's probably a very old motherboard where you've been lucky enough for the board not to blow. But you'll have a very, very hard time coming across these motherboards. Almost all motherboards, even the old ones these days, accept exclusively PCIe slots as graphics cards. PCI is just a normal slot on the motherboard. We use your normal expansion cards. That's times 4. So that's for your sound cards, modems, those kinds of cards. Maybe an extra expansion, what do you call it, a riser card to give you extra USB ports. It's not going to be a USB port, definitely not. That's an external port. That's outside the case, normally in the front or the back. Since we're talking about ports, it's not actually the question at hand here. We already know the answer here is C. I would encourage you guys to go online, go to Google or whatever, get some images of motherboards, and just familiarize yourself with where is what on the motherboard. Just check, where does the CPU go? Where does the RAM go? What slot does the PCI, what does a PCI slot look like? What does a PCIe slot look like? What does the CMOS slot look like? All of those, because there is a simulation exam. This is known as a PBQ. PBQ stands for performance-based question. There's multiple PBQs in both the A+ exams. You might get none, you might get all of them, but the average person gets about 3 of them. I think there's about 8 PBQs in each exam. Average person gets 3 of them. One of these PBQs, they're going to give you a motherboard. On the left-hand side of the motherboard, there's a whole bunch of names, and you need to drag these names to the right components on the motherboard. Basically, you're identifying components on the motherboard. So if you do get this simulation, you might not. I would say start the ones you're familiar with, and you're going to find you might at most be left with like 1 or 2. Then it's very easy to make a calculated guess as to where they might go. But ideally, we want to have you guys know exactly where everything goes on the motherboard. So you'd be wise to just familiarize yourself with where what goes on the motherboard, because that is a PBQ in the exam, and PBQs count for a lot of marks in the exam, guys. All right, let's move on to the next question. 28. User 1 has a laptop that has been running for many years. This laptop now has a bulge at the bottom casing and overheats from time to time when plugged into the power. What is the most likely cause here? Alright, so it has been running for a long time, we know that much. And it's forming a bit of a bubble or a bulge at the bottom casing of this laptop. What normally causes that? Guys, the fan would not cause that. The fan might stop working at some point. It might make a lot of noise at some point. It might get clogged. But the fan cannot cause a bulge. Hard drives, also not. They might stop working. So if it's a mechanical hard drive, you might hear a clicking sound or all kinds of sounds. But the hard drive will not swell or bulge. A battery, yes. Batteries sometimes do this even though they work fine. As time goes by, batteries sometimes just do this because of age. Sometimes they do this because of overcharging. Sometimes batteries do this because they get too hot or because you just using and abusing them in a wrong manner. Power adapters might cause this. Power adapter is the charger cable of the laptop. The adapter is that little square block you find on the charger cable, which brings the voltage down essentially to about approximately 19 volts. It might be the power adapter. So if the power adapter is not the original of the laptop and the specs don't meet up or match it perfectly, it could slightly be overcharging, undercharging the battery. And that is a cause. But if you read the question, it says what is the most likely cause here? That would be the battery. The second likely one would be the power adapter. Moving on to question 29. With which of the following hardware components will a computer not generate a BIOS beeping code if there is a hardware problem? Choose all that applies. So there's more than one answer we need to choose here. If you're not familiar with a BIOS beeping code, even though most of us don't actually use a BIOS anymore, we just use a UFI, we still refer to it as a BIOS beeping code. So if there is a hardware issue on your computer, depending on what the issue is, the computer would normally make a beeping sound. If it makes one beep sound right after you start a computer, that is the post beep. So it means everything is a good working order. You want to hear one solid beep. Normally it's a lot easier to hear this with a desktop PC. Not all laptops do this. Most laptops don't even make that sound. But you want to hear one short, quick beep. That means everything is working. It's basically like doing a roll call. It's going to say, hey, CPU, are you there? Are you working? CPU is going to say, yes, I'm here, buddy. It's going to say, RAM, are you there? Are you working? Yes, I'm here. And this all happens like in a fraction of a second. Now, if something is not working correctly, it'll make a code of some kind. It could be a one long beep, multiple long beeps, a lot of rapid beeping, short beeping. Now, I can't tell you this code means this or that code means that because it depends on the model and the make. I've seen even if you've got the same make laptop as me or desktop as me, the codes don't mean the same. You will have to go and check that specific code for your specific make and your specific model because it means different. Now, when do we not get a beeping code if there's a hardware problem? Looking at the list, if you get a CPU problem, you will get a beep. It's normally a long solid beep, but it could be otherwise. But from my experience, it's usually a long solid beep. If it's a RAM issue, yes, you will get a beep. In most cases, from my experience, it's a lot of rapid beeps from most motherboards. PSU, that is the power supply unit. No, you will not get a beep. So that's one of the answers. If there's something wrong with the power supply, remember the power supply's job is to give power to the computer. Now, if there's something wrong with the power supply, it's 10 to 1 not giving power to the computer, which means the computer cannot generate the beeping sound since it does not have power to generate the beeping sound. You see where I'm going with this? The answer D says graphics card. Yes, graphics cards, I had it once or twice in my life where they were not seated properly into the slot and they would generate some sort of beeping code. But it's not the answer today. The second answer here is motherboard. And that really is the case because the beeping sound, for those of you who don't know, is actually coming from the motherboard. It's a built-in speaker on the motherboard. Sometimes you can actually see it's like a small little circular cylinder, black little thingy that you can see. It's got like a little hole in it. That is the speaker. So the sound's coming from the motherboard. And if the motherboard is the faulty component, how do you expect it to generate a code? It cannot generate a code because it's the problem to begin with. You see, it's kind of like a catch-22 here, isn't it? Moving on to question 30. With which of the following allows multiple digital networks to transverse through a switch? I think I accidentally explained this one to you guys earlier now, didn't I? So what device did I say earlier can you use to create multiple virtual networks inside a physical network without having to go and put it down additional switches and additional cables and all that? That is a VLAN. A VLAN inside a switch. So earlier we spoke about VLANs. We said what device can you use to create VLANs? And the answer was a switch. I told you it's more specifically a managed switch, not an unmanaged switch, a managed switch. And now they want to know, okay, what kind of networks do we use? Which of the following allows multiple digital networks to transverse through a switch? It's VLANs. VPN, as we've explained earlier in this video as well, that's a virtual private network to allow you to connect remotely, but yet encrypted and securely to a remote location like the office. DHCP is a role you install on a server, which essentially dishes out IP addresses to devices in your network. It could be the DHCP that's built into your router. And remote desktop is just remote desktop. It allows you to remote desktop from one machine to another and control it remotely. So it's got nothing to do with digital networks. The only one that allows you to go and do multiple networks within one physical network is a VLAN, and that's done through a switch, more specifically a managed switch. Question 31. A user reports that the system time on their computer keeps slowly but surely falling behind. What action can the user take? Now, usually, if you go and plug out the power cord on a desktop PC, or you remove the battery on a laptop, and you plug it back in, did any of you guys ever notice that the system time, that's the clock time at the bottom right of your computer, never actually falls behind? Even though there was no power, the time and the date and everything is perfectly fine. How do you think your computer remembers that? How is it possible if there was no power? It's because of a battery on the motherboard. You can actually go and check it. It's called a coin cell battery. If you happen to look at your motherboard, you'll see it looks like a coin cell battery. It's roughly the size of your thumb's nail, maybe a little bit bigger than your thumb's nail, but it's on the motherboard. Now, as time goes by, these batteries sometimes become a little bit flat. And the first indicator of that would be the time on your clock slowly but surely starts falling behind. After a couple of days or a couple of weeks, the clock will be 10 minutes behind. And as time goes by, it starts falling behind more and more and quicker. It's got nothing to do with the age of the battery, although age is one factor. It's generally not the age. It's just random. I've had PCs where they would last 10, 20 years and the clock would be fine. I've had computers where they would not even be 1 year old and the battery would be flat. So I think sometimes it's just old stock. Sometimes it's just duds. It's just random. And normally all IT technicians like myself have a couple of old spare motherboards lying around where the board is blown, but the battery is still fine. You can just go and hijack one of those batteries and just put it into the other motherboard and boobity bop, there you go, everything will work again. So you kind of probably know what the answer is by now. Looking at the answers, replace the motherboard. Yeah, well, that would solve the problem, but that's a little excessive because a new motherboard normally comes with a new battery. That's very expensive, and that's just going extreme. Would solve the problem, but that's not the answer. B, replace the CPU. No, that's got nothing to do with the system time. Replace the CMOS battery. Yes, they're very cheap, and quite frankly, most likely not going to even have to go and buy one if you have spare motherboards lying around. Just go and hijack one of those batteries. The last one says reseat the RAM modules. So it could be that one of them is loose, not connected properly. No, if one of them were loose, you get a loud beeping sound coming from the computer. Remember those beeping codes? Yeah, you get that. You would know if the RAM was loose. Trust me, you would know. It's going to make a hell of a racket. Moving on. Question 52. A user reports that their PC sometimes fails to boot. Sometimes, not always apparently. The user also mentions that performance appears to be degrading. During inspection, you notice a weird, repetitive ticking sound. What should you do first? That sounds similar to a problem we experienced earlier in this video, does it not? So, reseat the RAM modules. Does RAM make a sound, guys? No. RAM does not make a sound, and even if they were loose, like I said, you would be hearing a loud BIOS beeping code. I assure you it's not A. Extract the data. Yes, I think the question said earlier, what's the first thing you should do when you hear a clicking and ticking sound? You back up the data, because that's an indication of a failing hard drive, guys. Check the fans. It could be fans, but you can very quickly hear where the ticking is coming from. And if it doesn't sound like it's coming from a fan, yeah, you want to back up as quickly as possible. You can normally very quickly see if it's from a fan or not. The last answer says check for any DVD or CD discs in the tray. No, that's not going to make a clicking or a ticking sound. Question 33. A user reports that when they move their Cat5e cable, which is connected to a wall jack, it fails. What should you use or do? And then they say choose all that applies. So there could be one answer, it could be none of them, it could be all of them. I don't know. So it could be 2 or 3 of them. It's usually about 2 of them. So the user says it's when they move the cable. So if we read it slowly, it says the user reports that when they move the cable. So they're not saying it's not working. They're saying it does not work when they move it. So there's some sort of issue. What can you use or do to go and solve this issue? Now, we have to choose from the list that's given to us normally. So looking at the list here, RJ45, that's the connector on the cable itself. RJ11, that's a telephone connector, and we know this is not a telephone. Tone generator, or toner probe as they sometimes call it, that's just to trace the cable. We don't want to trace the cable, we know where it is. A magnetized screwdriver, what would you use a screwdriver for in this instance? Nothing, it's unrelated. And then a crimper. So if I look at the list that's given to us, I would say the answer is A and E. RJ45 connector, because they said it's a Cat5 cable, and we know the connector for that cable is an RJ45. They say as soon as they move it, it fails. So the chances are the connector has just not been crimped properly. It's just not been pressed down properly. So the crimper, which is the other answer, I believe, is what we use to go and press down the copper pins into the little connector. So you push that little connector, that RJ45 connector, into the crimper. You press down on it as hard as you possibly can to force them to make contact. And if the previous technician did not do it properly, they did not press down on it all the way, it's making contact, but it's not making contact properly, which is 10 to 1 why it is doing this from time to time, where it's making contact, when it does not make contact. So yeah, if I look at the answer, if I look at the answers, I would say that's probably the answer here. If you check, yep, that's the answers. Question 54. Some of your users report that whenever multiple applications are being used, not one, multiple, their computer's response time slows down a lot. When only one application is open, the response time is just fine. Which of the following should be upgraded? So we know it's a performance issue. If they open a lot of applications, it's laggy, gets slow. Only one, it's perfectly fine. So what do we upgrade in a situation like that? Is it the hard drive, HDD? Is it the CPU, the processor? The RAM, that's the memory, the temporary memory? Or is it the SSD, which is also hard drive? So A and D is essentially the same thing. The difference is SSD, so solid state drive, that's a much, much faster drive because it's static memory. And A is, well, just normal, slow mechanical memory here. Now, you might think it'll be a solid state drive, but no, guys. The answer here is the RAM. So when you open any program, it loads the program from your hard drive into the RAM, and from there, it calculates it between the RAM and the CPU. The RAM is your work area. You can think of your RAM as your disk. If you've got a very small disk in front of you, you can only have a couple of documents and maybe your laptop in front of you. But if you've got a very huge desk in front of you, you can have your laptop, lots of files, lots of documents, a printer and a scanner and a this and a that. The more space you've got, the more you've got to work with. You see where I'm going with this? So think of your RAM as your disk. So that is why when the user only opens one application, there's not really any issue because the RAM is still, it's more than enough. But if they open multiple applications, it's trying to shove all of that from the hard drive into the RAM, and the RAM is just not enough. The RAM cannot keep up. It's like you trying to put too much on your disk and you just don't have space. It's going to start falling off the disk and it's just not going to work. You need to get yourself a bigger disk. You need to get yourself more RAM. So what are we going to upgrade? The RAM, guys. Question 35. Client-side virtualization. So when I say client-side, I mean specifically on Windows 10 or Windows 11 in most cases. Because we have had virtualization for quite some time, but it was normally done on the server side. So when we say client-side virtualization, we normally refer to Windows 10 or Windows 11. So client-side virtualization, guest machines have similar security requirements as physical machines, physical computers. You still need to ensure separation from other virtual machines though. How can this be achieved? So before I explain this, a virtual machine, for those of you that's not familiar, is exactly like a real computer. It just does not have its own hardware. It does not have its own RAM, CPU, hard drive, that kinds of stuff. But in all other senses, it's exactly like a real computer. Has its own operating system. You can choose the operating system, the whole shebang. You can install software on it. You can install firewalls and security software on it, all that kinds of stuff. So if you've got multiple virtual machines on one computer, you essentially have multiple computers on a computer, if that makes sense. And they also need to be protected from one another, because if one virtual machine gets infected with some sort of malware like ransomware, we do not want that virtual machine infecting the other ones. So they need to be isolated from one another. And I think I just gave the answer away. So looking at the possible answers here, authorization, what's that? That is to make sure you've got permission to access whatever you're trying to access. We actually need to cover B first, which is authentication. Authentication is to prove you are who you claim to be or what you claim to be. And this is normally done via username and a password, email address and a password, a PIN, a fingerprint. And if you look at a company, once you've proven you are who you claim to be, probably a username and a password, it will then from that point check what access you've got as that user. I suppose you can think of this as permissions or privilege. So if I log in as myself, it's going to see, oh, sorry, you're just a trainer. You only have access to slides and manuals and labs and whatever you would expect an IT trainer to have access to, like myself. That's authorization. So authentication, it's going to check if I am who I claim to be. Authorization, think of that as step 2. What level of access do you have, and what do you have access to once you have proven your identity? Isolation is to isolate things from one another. This can be anything, but in this case it's for 2 virtual machines, which is the answer. Hardening is just to make something more secure. So this will probably be something like a firewall. To close ports that don't need to be open. If there's ports that's not in use, you close them. If services are running on a machine, like a server, and they don't need to run, you end them. You turn them off. So if there's programs running that don't need to run, you turn them off, because all of these are security risks. That's called hardening. But if you want to split things from one another like virtual machines, that's isolation, guys. The answer is isolation. Question 36. One of the users in your company connects their smartphone to their laptop. What type of network has the user just created? Now, looking at the list that we've got in front of us, we've got LAN, WLAN, which is a wireless LAN, GAN, and PAN. So LAN is for local area network. WLAN is wireless local area network. GAN is a global area network. And PAN is a personal area network. Now LAN is when you've got 2 or more computers or devices connected to one another, usually. This can be 2 or 3 computers. This can be 100 computers. That's a LAN. Generally in the same building, though. Wireless LAN is pretty much the same thing, guys. It's just wireless. A LAN, this is the funny thing, a LAN could be computers that's just network cable. It can be computers that's just wireless, or it can be a mix of the two, where a wireless LAN is just wireless. But a LAN could technically also be a wireless LAN, if you think about it. Now, GAN is a global area network. There's pretty much just one of that. That will be the internet, guys. A PAN is a personal area network. That is anything that fits onto your desk. So you can imagine having a desk once again in front of you. And if you've got a laptop or a desktop on that desk in front of you, anything that's pretty much within arm's reach and it can connect to your machine and your machine only is part of your PAN, which is the answer here, mind you. So if I connect my smartphone, which is the answer, to my laptop, that's a PAN. It doesn't matter if I connect my smartphone wirelessly via something like Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi, or would I connect it with a USB cable or something? That's a PAN. If I connect my printer, which is right next to me, to my laptop, would it be cable or wireless? That's part of my PAN. So anything that's on my desk within arm's reach is part of my PAN. But as soon as I go further than that and I connect one other computer, now it's a LAN. So PAN is pretty much the smallest network you can get. And then the second smallest would be a LAN, guys. Question 57. You must upgrade the RAM on a user's laptop. Which of the following should you do first? So we know we're going to upgrade the laptop's RAM, but what should you do first before you go ahead and actually do that? So looking at the answers, verify the memory requirements of the motherboard. So in other words, make sure the motherboard supports more RAM. Just because it's got an open slot, if you're lucky enough to have an open slot in the motherboard, does not mean the laptop supports more. It might have reached its limit. So maybe this laptop supports only 8 gigs of RAM. It's got one chip in there, but the chip is an 8 gig chip and there's an open slot. So all you can do is you can just split it into two 4 gig chips, but at the end of the day, if you're going to put in another chip in there, it's not going to accept it because the motherboard has reached its limit. Yes, motherboards have limits, guys. So before you go and upgrade the RAM, make sure the motherboard is not on its limit. Make sure the motherboard has an open slot. Make sure the RAM you're about to buy is compatible with that motherboard as well. So if you need to buy DDR2, make sure the motherboard supports DDR2, or just go and check what type of motherboard it is, what type of RAM it takes, what kind of speed the RAM needs to be. So verify the memory requirements of the motherboard, which is the answer here, by the way. B, run the diagnostic test on the current memory. No, that is to test if the memory is faulty. There's nothing wrong with the laptop, we just want to upgrade it. Confirm that the new and the old memory are the same brand. The brand does not matter. You want to keep them the same, but in this instance, it doesn't matter, guys. So in real life, laptops, and especially flipping servers, you want to try and keep the same brand. I'm not promoting or demoting any brand here. It doesn't matter what brand you use, as long as you keep in the same brand. If you don't keep hardware components like RAM the same brand, you're going to get all kinds of weird issues. That's not what this question is about, though. This question just wants to know if you want to do a normal RAM upgrade, what should you do? Just verify the requirements, guys. But in real life, yes, if you can, try and keep it to the same brand. And then the last answer here says connect an ESD strap, electrostatic discharge strap. That is once you've got the RAM. So I'm not saying it's wrong. Yes, you should go probably do that according to the manual. We know we're not going to go and do that. Nobody does that in real life. But according to the manual, yes, you are going to do that. But that's not the first thing you're going to do. Remember, the question said, what do you do first? So we don't have the RAM yet. Remember, we don't have RAM here yet. We want to verify the requirements first. And once we know what kind of RAM we need and how much we can go and get, then and only then do we go and connect the anti-static strap. Once we've got the RAM in our possession and we're about to go and install it, then yes, you go and put on the strap. Question 58. You receive a complaint that a user is having issues with a contactless payment feature. The device is not detecting payment options. Which of the following is the most likely cause? Now, whenever you see something like that in an exam where they say most likely, especially if there's capital letters and bold letters, that normally indicates there might be more than one answer that's correct here. They want to know which one is more correct out of the lot here. So what is a contactless payment feature, guys? That's kind of like if you look at most of these bank cards these days in most countries, you've got what we call tap and go. You bring your bank card near the speed point or the pay point, and as soon as you bring it near it or touch it, your payment goes through. It may or may not ask you a PIN, depending on how you set this up at your bank. But essentially, you don't have to insert the card. You just bring the card near the speed point or the pay point, and it's going to go through. That's called contactless payment. All right, so with that in mind now, looking at the answers, do you think this could be a Bluetooth issue? No, it's got nothing to do with Bluetooth. Those devices do not use Bluetooth. Now that there's Bluetooth interfere with those devices, it's got nothing to do with Bluetooth. NFC, could that be a cause? Yes, it could. NFC stands for near field communication. And when you bring a card near a pay point like that, do you know what we call that? It's called NFC. The symbol on your card, you see, you'll find most bank cards got like little bars on it. That symbol is the symbol for NFC, believe it or not. It's the symbol for NFC. So it could very likely be an NFC issue, and it probably is an NFC issue. Could it be a Wi-Fi issue? No. Doesn't run on the same frequency. It's got nothing to do with that. Could it be a router issue? No. I mean, I suppose it could be a Wi-Fi and a router issue, but it's not the most likely issue. So it could be that pay point is connected to your Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi is down. So it could be. It could be that your router is faulty. Maybe the internet is off, and that's why the payment doesn't want to go through, because you bring the card near the speed point, and the speed point is offline at that particular moment, it's not going to go through. But normally you would know that, because on the screen, it's going to refuse to bring up the payment, it's going to show you there's no signal or whatever. You would know that. So the most likely cause here, it's an NFC issue, a near field communication issue. Question 39. You have a remote user that needs to securely connect their laptop to a company server. What can the user use? So they need to connect, probably sounds like it's remotely to the company server, but it needs to be secure. So it's remotely, but securely. All right, so looking at the answers. Could it be a WAN? WAN is wide area network. No, that is just to connect, for example, different branches to one another and all that in general. VPN, yes, that's remote connectivity and it is secure. It's encrypted, in fact. It stands for Virtual Private Network. Could it be DHCP? No, that's a role you install on a server, or it could be built into a router and its purpose is to dish out IP addresses. It's got nothing to do with remote connectivity. Remote desktop, yes, that's remote connectivity, but it's not secure. You need to go and turn it on and allow it for the firewall, but it's definitely not secure. So out of these two, the only two plausible answers is B and D. D is not secure, B is secure. So the answer here is B. Question 40. One of your technicians has to install an IP phone. So that's these new phones that works off network cables. Not your old conventional ones that works off telephone cables. You'll find the majority of medium to large size companies, or hell, even small companies these days, work off phones that work off a network cable. So they work over the internet. If your internet's down, the phones don't work. So one of your technicians has to install an IP phone. When they connect this IP phone to a network cable with an RJ45 connector, the phone stays dead. Which of the following will resolve the issue? So looking at the answers that we've been presented with, change the ports on the switch. No, it's not going to make a difference. Changing the ports on the switch is not going to solve the issue. You'll find that these phones, doesn't matter what brand or model you buy, in the box you'd find a phone. And in the box you'll find a short network cable normally, not that you have to use it. And in the box you'll find like a small little adapter. It looks like a cell phone charger. So you can go and plug the phone into a power source, like a 2-point plug in most cases. You can plug it directly into a power source with the power cable and then connect it to the network cable. That's one way to solve this problem, but that's not listed here. Alternatively, you can do what most companies do. As soon as you connect that network cable, it powers up the device through the network cable by using what we call PoE. PoE stands for Power over Ethernet. You're sending power over a network cable. Now to do that, you can use the PoE injector, which is the answer here, or which we normally use in a real company, is a PoE switch. It looks like a normal switch, but it's normally a managed switch, except it's not just any managed switch, this one. It allows you to send power through those network cables. So any device you plug into one of those network cables that's plugged into that switch, if that device does not have power, it can turn it on and give it power through the network cable. Not all devices accepts power through network cables though, so this is normally things like IP phones or access points, because these devices often don't have power near them, or it just looks sloppy if they've got a power cable plugged in. And if you look at an IP phone, if I'm going to have an extra power cable dangling out of it, it's going to look very unneat and untidy. So we normally like to power it with the network cable. As soon as you plug it in, there you go. Access points, on the other hand, it's not just in the sense of neatness, but it's also in the sense of there's normally not power where we put these little buggers. An access point normally goes onto the ceiling in most buildings, and there's normally not a power point there. You can't exactly go and plug it in. It does come with a power adapter, but where are you going to plug that sucker in? There's no power cords or power plugs there, outlets. So as soon as you plug the network cable into it through the roof, it's going to turn it on, because it's going to receive power through the switch, guys. So yeah, changing the ports on the switch, not going to make a difference. Replacing the IP phone, no, the phone's not going to make a difference. Sending power through the cable by using a PoE injector, that's the smaller, cheaper way of doing it. Yes, that can get the job done. But it's only for one cable. So if it's for one phone, yes, that'll work. But if it's more than one phone, no, you're going to need a lot of PoE injectors. Upgrade the network cable, no, that's not going to make any difference either. Question 41. One of your technicians installs a printer for a user. When the technician tries to print a test page, the printer is listed as generic. So it does pick it up, but it lists this printer as generic. Which of the following best describes what the technician should do next? Should the technician change the toner? The toner, for those of you who don't know, is the ink for a printer, more specifically for laser printers. So that's not going to do anything. Why would changing the ink list the printer differently? Remember, the printer is listed as generic. We don't want it to be listed as generic. So changing the toner is not going to make any difference. That's the ink. Ink's got nothing to do with how it's being listed. Connect a USB cable. No, it's already connected. If it was not connected, it would not be listed to begin with. It's already listed. So whether you connect it via wireless or cable, it's not going to make a difference as to how it is listed. Change the printer trays to allow duplex printing. No. So changing the printer trays and choosing how you want to print, whether I want to print double-sided or single-sided, is not going to make any difference to how the printer is listed. The last one here says install appropriate printer driver. Yes. The reason why it's listed as generic is because it knows there's a printer. It just does not know what printer this is. And the reason for that is because it's got the wrong flipping driver. As soon as you install the right driver, the correct driver, it's going to see, oh, now I know what printer this is. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for showing me. That's the purpose of the driver, guys. Question 42. When running a virtual machine as a sandbox, which of the following is the best reason for doing so? So sandbox, for those of you who don't know, is a terminology we use when we put something in a little, I suppose you can think of this as if you've ever watched any good crime episode or crime movie where they've got like a potential bomb that's going to go off or whatever, and the bomb squad comes there. You'll find that if they're not entirely sure whether they can defuse this bomb or so, they'll put it like in a special container, a bomb box, so that if this bomb happens to go off while they're trying to defuse it, the explosions for the most part contained in that box, minimizing the damage or preventing it altogether. A sandbox is kind of the same thing. I know it's not the best example I've come up with today, but it's kind of the same thing digitally speaking. So if you want to run a computer, a virtual computer, or an application or a something, but you want to run it safely because you are suspecting that this machine or this application might be harmful in some sort of way, we run that in what we call a sandbox environment. So that if that virtual machine turns out to be harmful, or the virtual machine gets infected afterwards with malware, or the application turns out to be harmful, then it's contained in that isolated environment. So if I'm running a new program or a game on my computer, and I think this program or game might be harmful to my computer, you are going to run that in a sandbox. And if it turns out to be harmful, it's not going to harm your computer because it was contained in the sandbox. It's got nothing to do with sand. It's just the terminology we use to say it's an isolated environment. So let's read the question again. When running a virtual machine as a sandbox, so this virtual machine is an isolated environment, which of the following is the best reason for doing so? So why would I run a virtual machine in an isolated container, if you will? Is this to test software in a safe environment? Yeah, that sounds like the answer, doesn't it? B, to run multiple machines on the same hardware? No, you can already do that. You just need to make sure you've got enough hardware. C, to have dedicated hardware for single system? No, it's got nothing to do with that. D, to increase the efficient use of computing resources? No, you can go and choose that in the what do you call it, virtual machine manager, the hypervisor. So we're using Hyper-V, VMware, VirtualBox, whatever. You can normally go and choose how hardware gets used. So it's got nothing to do that. The answer here is to test software or a virtual machine, application, or a game in a safe, isolated environment. That's the answer. Question 43. Which one of the following is the most likely device you would use to connect users to the internet in a small office, home office environment? So they're saying most likely. So there might be more than one. If you look at a hub, no. That's a device that just connects people or devices to one another, and it's a very stupid and dumb device, as we've said earlier in this video. A switch. It's smaller than a hub, but it's just to connect multiple devices to one another. A router is a device you use to connect devices and people to the internet. That's your gateway, so that's the answer. Access point, that's just to make your network wireless. So it could be that you go through the access point first and then you get to the router, but they said most likely. They said it's a small office, home office environment, so it's very small. And if it's a very small environment, you probably don't even need an access point. You just need a router, guys. So your answer here is C, router. Moving on to question 44. Wow, the numbers are getting big now. One of your fellow technicians is requesting that the company buy new cables to be used with the F-type connectors that are already in-house. Which of the following cables should the company buy? Alright, so by reading this question, we can establish the company has connectors. They are specifically of the F-type. So what kind of cable works with F-type connectors? That's actually the question here. So looking at the list that we've got in front of us here, we've got coaxial, plenum, Cat5e, and fiber. The answer here, guys, I'm going to jump right to it, is coaxial. F-type is one of many types of connectors you get for coaxial cable. Plenum, that could be Cat5, Cat6, whatever. So plenum is normally something they'll mention in the exam or the course when we talk about fire-resistant cables, cables that don't give off poisonous gases, or if you want to comply with some sort of fire code. Yes, that's when we're going to be mentioning plenum in the course or in the exam. Cat5e, well, that can probably apply to a lot of questions. It depends on what the question actually is. But Cat5e uses RJ45 connectors and only RJ45 connectors. Plenum, for the most part, is also RJ45. Fiber, yeah, fiber's got a lot of connectors, but F-type is not one of them. Coming at fiber from an A plus perspective, they're only going to be asking you about SC, ST, and LC connectors in the exam. But like I said earlier in this video, you do actually get quite a few other connectors. They are only covered in the N plus course. So for A plus, you only need to know the three that I just mentioned. Once again, F-type is a coaxial connector, guys. Moving on to the next question. Question 45. One of your fellow technicians is configuring a new small office home office router, or router, however you want to pronounce that, for a small business. The ISP of the client gives the technician an IP address on the router's WAN port. Which of the following addresses did the technician most likely configure on the router? So the ISP gave them an IP. What IP did the ISP give them? Which one do you think that is? Now here we've got a bunch of IPs in front of us. So looking at these IPs in front of us, the first one starts with 169.254. Guys, what kind of IP address is that? Remember, we did mention that in the course, and we did actually even mention that earlier in this video. Any IP address that starts with 169.254 is not actually an IP address. We call that a PIPA. It means you do not have an IP address. The device is configured on dynamic, not static, and it's unable to get an IP address for whatever reason. So you can think of 169.254 as a placeholder. So no, that is not the IP address that the ISP would have given you. That is something you get automatically. Looking at B, 172.16, that is a private IP address, and it's a Class B IP address. I would not say it's set in stone that it's Class B, but it is a private IP address. But coming at it from an A plus perspective, in the A plus course, they say any IP address that starts with 192.168.0 is private, but Class C. Any IP address that starts with 172.16 is private, but Class B. And any IP address that starts with 10.something.something.something is private, but Class A, of course. So, but that's not set in stone. I mean, I've seen a few IP addresses where they start at 172.16, and it's not Class B, but it's actually a Class C, depending on how it's configured. But according to this specific course, no. 172.16 is a Class B. But just know in real life, there is a difference. You know, there's a difference between book knowledge and real life. So 172.16 is private. It's Class B. 10.1.50, that is private, but it's Class A. And the last one there, D, is just randomly 19.45.something.something. That is a public IP address. So any IP address you do not recognize, so if it's not 127.0.0.1, which is loopback, if it's not a PIPA, if it's not a private IP address, you know, Class A, B, or C, then it's most likely going to be a public IP address. And that is what D is. Now, the ISP, the IP address that they give you, guys, that's going to be a public IP address. Any IP address that's visible to the outside world, like your ISP, is a public IP address. ISP and whoever else cannot see or access the IP addresses in the inside of your network, which are private IP addresses. So if you go to any website online, or someone tries to trace you online, or whatever the case might be, the IP address they will see and that they will use is going to be your public IP address. So the answer here, guys, is D, that public IP address. Question 46. One of your fellow technicians is dealing with a printer where the printed text is not adhering properly to the paper. Which of the following should be replaced to resolve the problem or solve the problem? So they're printing, but the ink the powder ink is not really sticking to the paper. What can be a cause for that to happen, guys? Now, looking at the available answers here, we've got waste container. That is just to basically capture all the excess ink and all that kinds of stuff. That's going to have no influence on whether the powder ink, the toner as they call it, sticks to the paper or not. So that's just to capture any excess ink. The roller, you actually get more than one roller on most printers, especially those big ones with the big companies. They're normally made out of rubber. And the rollers are for the most part just used to transfer the paper or papers from one area in the printer to another area in the printer. There's normally one roller on the left and one roller on the right. It rolls the paper along inside the printer and the inner workings to get it from one area to the next area so that whatever needs to happen is going to happen on it. So the roller will maybe cause paper jams if it's not working correctly, or the paper will not move at all, but it's not going to have any influence whether the ink sticks to the paper or not. Toner, looking at the third answer, there is the actual ink itself, the powder ink. So it either it's going to stick to it or it's not going to stick to it. So if you have no ink on the paper at all, that could be a result of maybe just having no toner. But if you can see that there is ink, it's just not sticking to the paper, the issue is not going to be toner, guys. So that leaves us with the fuser. The fuser, for those of you that's not familiar with printers, more specifically laser printers, because I can see this is regarding a laser printer. It is basically what is used to fuse the ink, which is called a toner, to the paper. It's very, very, very hot. It applies a lot of heat to that powder ink, and it basically, I suppose you can go and say, fuses it to the paper. Melts it to the paper if you want to go and summarize it. That's what is basically it. So if ink is not really sticking to the paper like it's supposed to, it could be an indication that your fuser is not working the way it's supposed to. Maybe it doesn't clean itself properly. Maybe it's just time to replace it because nothing lasts forever. So the answer here, guys, is fuser. Question 47. Which one of the following is the default port for HTTPS traffic? So if you don't remember what HTTPS is, it's short for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is encrypted secure web browsing. So if you want to go and do encrypted secure web browsing, what port does that normally go and use? So here is a long list. I made it more than 4 on purpose, otherwise the answer is going to be way too easy for you guys. So the first one, 20, that is for FTP, File Transfer Protocol, so that's for servers and stuff in the background. 22, that is SSH, so that is to securely and remotely connect to something like a router or a switch in a command line interface of sorts. 23 is Telnet, pretty much the same as 22, it's just, well, Telnet is unsecure. It's the older version of doing it. 53 is DNS, so that's converting names to IPs and IPs to names in a nutshell. So if you want to go do web browsing, that is how your computer knows where it needs to go and what it's going to and all that. 80 is HTTP, not HTTPS. So 80 is normal web browsing in clear text. It's unsecure. And then the last one is 443, which is HTTPS, encrypted web browsing. So there you guys have it. Your answer is 443. You guys would be wise to go and familiarize yourself with the well-known port numbers, which are also known as common port numbers. I actually have a whole section in one of my A+ videos which covers that. And if you're still curious, you can actually go and check out my N+ series. I think I've got a dedicated video in my N+ playlist that specifically covers common port numbers. I think that's the video's title. It's a video dedicated just to common port numbers. So you can go check that out as well. So if anyone wants to go check that out, just let me know. I'll drop the link in the comment section down below if you can find it. Or I'll let you know which video to go and check. But yeah, it's worth checking out. It's called common port numbers. Familiarize yourself with that. So there's about 65,500 odd port numbers, but you don't need to know them all because not all of them are well-known port numbers. You do need to know the well-known port numbers, though, for the exam, guys. You need to know the common port numbers, is what they call it. Right, moving on to question 48. A user complains that they have an Android phone and that the screen is not responding to any form of input. Which of the following should the technician do? Alright, so here's a couple of possible answers for you guys. So the phone is on, it's working, but when you try and interact with the screen, any form of input that is, when you try and touch it, it's just not responding at all. So what could fix that issue? So A here says replace the gyroscope. I always thought it was gyroscope, but it's gyroscope. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. That is the thing in your phone that allows it to detect which side is up and which side is down. So if you have this turned on your phone and you rotate your screen, you would see the screen rotates with it, so it's always going to have the screen, the picture image, the right side up. When that's a bit annoying though is if you're lying on your side in your bed and you want to go maybe watch something on Facebook or whatever, you're going to find the screen's going to rotate and you don't actually want it to rotate because your head is on your pillow. So in that instance, you would actually turn gyroscope off temporarily. So it's not gyroscope. That's not going to have any influence on the input of the screen. B says replace the digitizer. Now the digitizer, guys, is something that applies to tablets and phones. That is specifically for touch screen tablets and phones, and is the front layer. Now many of you guys might not notice, but a lot of phones and tablets, especially the touchscreen ones, have got multiple layers. The front layer is called your digitizer layer. That's most often the one that cracks and breaks and stuff. And that layer is the one that actually detects the touch, the input. And that's most likely the answer here. So the digitizer is not working. It's not going to be able to detect any form of input because it's cracked or broken or something in that regard. C says system on a chip. That makes no sense at all. And D says replace the battery. The battery has no influence on this. It says the phone is working. It's just not responding to any form of input. Changing the battery is not going to make a difference to that. So the answer here, guys, is to replace the digitizer. Now you'd find if you go to any form of store or if you happen to get your hands on a digitizer, it doesn't come on its own. It normally comes as a set, a complete new screen for the tablet or phone that comes with all the layers. Comes with the adhesive glue and everything. So you're just going to replace the whole freaking screen for that matter. It's the same price. So you might as well just go and replace the whole screen. Question 49. One of your technicians needs to use something to distribute traffic evenly between nodes. What can the technician use? So what are nodes? Nodes are, well, computers, guys. That's just another terminology we use for computers. There are some rare instances where we'll refer to folders as nodes, but generally in IT, when someone says nodes, we're talking about computers. So if you have traffic needs to be distributed evenly between servers or computers, how would one do that? So if you have, let's say, multiple servers that's hosting the same website, you don't want one server to have all the load on that one server, what would you use? Is it a proxy? No, a proxy is kind of like a firewall of sorts. It is, but it's not. It's like a bouncer at the door that says, thou shall not visit Facebook. Thou shall not visit YouTube. And if you or one of your users tries to access something that's not allowed, no, it's not going to allow it. Very easy to bypass a proxy, so that's a cheap way. It's the poor man's way of blocking people from accessing certain websites and stuff. You've got load balancer, which is actually the answer here. So load balancer can be a piece of hardware or software. These days it's usually software. And most often these are actually found in a cloud these days. So if you have something like a load balancer in place, it's going to split the load. So one user will get split onto server 1. If the second user tries to access your website, he or she will be dumped onto server 2. A third user will be dumped onto server 3. And if you only have 3 servers, it's going to start a cycle over at server 1 again. So when user 4 comes, it's going to dump user 4 onto server 1 again, and so on and so forth, splitting the load evenly. A firewall, everybody knows what a firewall is. So you get software ones, you get physical ones. But in a nutshell, a firewall is to, well, control traffic in your network environment, to block or allow ports, services, URLs, and even if you go look at the fancy hardware-based ones these days, they've got way more functionality and features than just that. A switch is a central device in most networks that allows you to go and connect various machines and devices to one another, but it does not distribute load. It just chooses how traffic goes to specific devices. So if one device needs to send information to another, the traffic is going to go specifically and only to that one device, unlike a hub. But it does not split the load. Definitely not. So the answer here, guys, is B, load balancer. Moving on to question 50, the last one. And once we're done with that, don't disappear on me just yet. So question 50. One of your technicians would like to inspect a laptop's wireless antenna. Where do you usually find most laptops' wireless antenna? Now, what I'm about to tell you is not applicable to all laptops. It's simply applicable to, well, most laptops out there. Where do you guys think the antenna of a laptop is when it comes to connecting wirelessly to networks and all that? Is it A, underneath the battery? Is it B, in the bezel of the lid? So that's kind of like in the screen, you know, behind the screen and next to your webcam and that kind of stuff. Is it C, near the network card? So that's in the actual body, you know, underneath the keyboard and all that, maybe near your motherboard. Or is it D, integrated into the motherboard? Now, guys, the answer here is B. It's actually in the lid. So the majority of laptops, believe it or not, the antenna is in the screen because the screen is normally upright and it's sticking out. So it only makes logically sense to put it in the screen. The screen is also a heck of a lot thinner. If it was in the body of the laptop, first of all, it would be a heck of a lot lower, and it would be surrounded by all kinds of extra components that's basically interfering with the signal. It'll be surrounded by the RAM and the motherboard and the CPUs and a whole bunch of other nonsense and metals and plastics and stuff, which is obstructing the signal. If it's in the screen, I'm not saying it's not obstructed the signal, but it's a heck of a lot less. The screen is thin, it's upright, it's high. It logically just makes sense to put it in the screen. So it's in the bezel of the lid. Alright folks, so first of all, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it helps some of you guys prepare for the exam. I am going to be uploading more of these videos, as I've said in the beginning. So the next video that'll be up will probably be for the 1102 exam. I'm also going to try and make many questions for that one. If you'd like additional questions for these exams, I am going to be uploading some of that onto my Patreon. So feel free to check out my Patreon. Link will be in the video description down below. And depending on how popular these videos are, I might upload a couple of extra ones onto YouTube as well. So yeah, once again, thank you very much for supporting the channel, guys. Give the video a like if you haven't done so. Maybe subscribe if you want to see when I upload these kinds of videos. And then lastly, guys, special thank you and shout out to everybody that's sponsoring this channel in this video. Those of you clicking on the thanks button below the video, those of you buying me coffees or milkshakes, the Patreon sponsors. And here's a list of the Patreon sponsors. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you all. Here's a list of the PayPal sponsors. Those of you that's making PayPal donations, thank you very, very much. And lastly, guys, if you would like to join my Discord server, which I have mentioned a few times before, that link would literally be at the very bottom of the video description. So if you open the video description and you go past all the timestamps, it's probably going to be a heck of a lot of timestamps because there's 50 questions. I'm going to try and add a timestamp for every one of the 50 questions. If you go to the very bottom, you'll find the Discord server link is way at the bottom for those of you that's interested in that. Alright guys, stay tuned for the other practice questions. Maybe subscribe. And if you want more of these, maybe check out my Patreon. Alright guys, see you on the next video.